Ancient Egyptian civilization, centered along the Nile River in northeast Africa, emerged around 3150 BC and lasted for over 3,000 years. It's known for its monumental architecture, complex society, and rich cultural achievements, including hieroglyphic writing and advanced mathematics. The civilization thrived due to the Nile's consistent flooding, which provided fertile land for agriculture, language, writing, and communication in ancient Egypt. In the golden sands of time, where mighty pyramids touched the skies and the Nile whispered secrets to the reeds, the ancient Egyptians carved their thoughts into stone, etched prayers into tomb walls, and painted stories that echoed for millennia. Welcome to the world of language, writing, and communication in ancient Egypt, a civilization that left behind not just monuments, but messages. The divine origins of language. To the ancient Egyptians, words were not merely symbols. They were magic. The spoken word had power. The written word had permanence. According to their mythology, it was the god Thoth who gifted language to humanity. Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, was believed to have invented writing. He was the divine scribe who recorded the judgments of the dead and maintained the balance of the cosmos. In this sacred worldview, communication was never taken lightly. To speak was to act. To write was to immortalize. The hieroglyphs, sacred symbols of meaning. The most iconic form of Egyptian writing is, of course, the hieroglyphs, an elaborate system of over 700 characters composed of pictures, phonetic symbols, and determinatives. Hieroglyphs were often used for sacred and formal writing, temple walls, tomb inscriptions, and royal decrees. Each hieroglyph was an art form: a coiled rope, a seated man, a vulture, a reed. Every symbol had multiple meanings depending on context. They could represent sounds, ideas, or literal objects. They were not meant to be read quickly, but to be absorbed, like poetry carved in stone. Hieratic and demotic, the scripts of daily life. But not everything was written in hieroglyphs. For the purposes of daily administration, priests and scribes used a simplified script known as hieratic. Flowing, cursive, and quicker to write, hieratic allowed the Egyptian bureaucracy to function, tracking taxes, recording trade, keeping temple records. Later, another script emerged, demotic. Even more simplified, it was used for legal documents, business transactions, and personal letters. These scripts show us that literacy was not just for the gods and kings. It was woven into the machinery of daily life. The scribe, guardian of knowledge. To be a scribe in ancient Egypt was to be powerful. From childhood, aspiring scribes were trained in specialized schools, often attached to temples. Their lessons were grueling, copying texts, memorizing symbols, and practicing calligraphy. A single mistake could alter meaning and cost someone their life or fortune. Scribes were respected. Some rose to high government offices. Others served in the courts of pharaohs or the inner sanctums of temples. Their tools? A palette with reed pens, a roll of papyrus, and ink made from soot and ochre. They did not merely record events, they shaped how they were remembered. Communication across classes. While only a fraction of the population could read or write, spoken language was the lifeblood of communication. The Egyptian language evolved over centuries, from Old Egyptian in the pyramid texts to Middle Egyptian during the Golden Age of literature, and then to Late Egyptian, Demotic, and finally Coptic. Each version reflected the shifts in power, culture, and outside influence. Yet, despite changes in script and speech, the voice of the people endured. Farmers shared folk tales by the fire. Priests recited hymns in candlelit chambers. Merchants haggled in bustling markets. Every voice was a thread in the fabric of Egypt's story. Public messaging and monuments. In a world without mass media, how did a pharaoh address his people? Through stone. Temples and obelisks became bulletin boards of the gods. Decrees were carved into granite walls. Victory proclamations were etched onto temple pylons. Even commoners saw and internalized these messages during festivals or pilgrimages. These inscriptions weren't only decorative. They were statecraft, religion, propaganda. When Ramses II carved tales of victory at Kadesh, He wasn't just preserving history, he was rewriting it. Love letters, prayers, and private words. Not all writing was monumental. Archaeologists have uncovered ostraca, shards of pottery and limestone, inscribed with shopping lists, love letters, and jokes. We read the plea of a mother begging for divine intervention to heal her child. The doodles of a bored student. A love poem comparing a woman's voice to the sweet chirping of birds. These fragments bring us closer to the real Egyptians. They remind us that beneath the god-kings and priests were humans, longing, laughing, praying. Foreign influence and language shift. Over time, Egypt's language landscape changed. With Greek conquest came bilingual texts, the most famous being the Rosetta Stone, which helped modern scholars unlock the secret of hieroglyphs. Later, under Roman rule and then Christianization, Coptic emerged. Coptic combined Egyptian words with Greek letters. It became the language of the early Egyptian church, and survives today in liturgical contexts. Though the ancient scripts faded from daily use, their memory remained in prayers, chants, and stone. Rediscovery and decipherment. For centuries, the world stared at Egyptian hieroglyphs in awe, but without understanding. Then came Jean-François Champollion, the brilliant linguist who, in 1822, cracked the code of the Rosetta Stone. Using Greek translations and Coptic knowledge, he unveiled a lost language. His discovery was not just academic. It was resurrection. Through it, the voices of priests, pharaohs, and poets spoke once more. The silent walls of tombs began to whisper their truths. Legacy and influence. The Egyptian obsession with language and symbolism influenced the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Arabs, and even modern Freemasonry. Today, tattooed on skin or embossed on jewelry, hieroglyphs carry aesthetic and mystical appeal. The Eye of Horus. The Ankh. Symbols of protection, life, and eternity. In museums, we marvel at papyri bearing the Book of the Dead, spells, and poems. Egypt may be ancient, but its words remain alive. To write was to remember. To speak was to awaken magic. In the echo of papyrus leaves and chisel marks on limestone, we hear a people determined to defy time. Their language may be old, but their voices, they still sing. Literature, myth, and storytelling in ancient Egypt. The eternal tale of Egypt. Close your eyes and let the desert winds of ancient Egypt guide you to a time when stories were sacred, and myths were more than just words. They were the lifeblood of culture, identity, and divine understanding. In the land where gods walked among men and scribes carved destinies onto temple walls, storytelling was not a luxury. It was a necessity. What was ancient Egyptian literature? In ancient Egypt, literature wasn't just entertainment. It was instruction, spirituality, philosophy, and politics all woven into one. Most of what we now call Egyptian literature came in the form of texts carved into tomb walls, written on papyrus scrolls, or etched onto monuments. There were several key forms. Religious texts, like the pyramid texts, coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead. Wisdom literature, offering moral teachings, like the instructions of Ptahhotep. Poetry and hymns, often honoring gods or describing love. Myths and epic tales, stories of gods, kings, and magical creatures. Historical records, written in grandiose narrative style. Egyptian scribes held high status, not just as record keepers but as preservers of cultural and cosmic order. Myths and gods, the sacred stories. Let us enter the world of mythology, where creation stories, divine conflicts, and mystical journeys shaped the Egyptian worldview. The creation myths. Egyptians had more than one creation myth depending on the region. Heliopolitan myth, Atum emerges from the chaotic waters of Nun, creates Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture, and the world unfolds. Memphite theology, Ptah creates the world by thought and word. Hermopolitan myth focuses on the Ogdoad, 8 deities representing primal elements. Each story had its own symbolism, but they all portrayed creation as the rise of order, Marat, out of chaos, Isfet. Osiris and Isis, the core myth. One of the most central myths was that of Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Horus. Osiris was a just king murdered by his jealous brother Seth. Isis, his devoted wife, resurrects him temporarily with the help of magic. Horus, their son, eventually defeats Seth to reclaim his father's throne. This story taught about death and rebirth, justice, divine right, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. Heroic tales and folk stories. Not all stories were about gods. Many tales featured heroes, animals, and magical adventures. Here are a few. The tale of the shipwrecked sailor. A sailor is stranded on a magical island. There, a giant serpent tells him tales of destruction, survival, and the loss of his kind. The serpent assures him that he will return safely. This tale teaches perseverance and faith, especially in times of despair. The story of Sinew. Sinew, a court official, flees Egypt after the king's death. He lives in exile but yearns for home. Eventually, he is welcomed back by the new pharaoh. It's a story of loyalty, identity, and redemption. The contendings of Horus and Seth. This tale explores the absurd and symbolic battle between Horus and Seth. They try everything, from boat races to transforming into hippos. It's entertaining but also deeply political, showing how balance and order emerge through divine arbitration. Love poems and personal expression. Ancient Egyptians were not emotionless monoliths. Love poems from the New Kingdom are among the most touching in ancient literature. They describe longing, beauty, desire, and the joy of presence. Some compare love to food, fragrance, and even wine. Sample passage. My love is like a sycamore in bloom, a cool shade in the heat of day. Her voice is wine, her touch the river. I am lost and wish no way home. These poems show that human emotion transcends millennia. Wisdom literature, the teachings of the sages. Egyptian wisdom literature was a guide to proper behavior, humility, and ethical leadership. The Instruction of Ptahhotep. Written over 4,000 years ago, it advised young men on how to live wisely. Do not be arrogant because of your knowledge. A kind word is better than a gift. The Instruction of Ani. This text offered guidance for everyday life and moral conduct. These were recited in schools and passed down through generations. Performance and oral tradition. Not all literature was written. Much was passed down orally. Storytellers, priests, and elders performed myths and tales during festivals and family gatherings. Chanting, gestures, and instruments would have accompanied these stories. Egyptians also used dramatic rituals to reenact myths, such as the Osiris Passion plays performed annually at Abydos. These were not just plays, they were communal affirmations of faith and tradition. Scribes, the memory keepers. The scribe was more than a writer, he was a sacred intermediary between gods, kings, and people. To be a scribe was to be educated, wise, and essential. Inscriptions like the satire of the trades praise scribes above all other jobs. Quote, "A scribe does not sweat in the sun like the plowman." Schools for scribes taught hieroglyphs, grammar, and ethics through rote copying of classic texts. Preservation and rediscovery. Thanks to Egypt's dry climate, many texts have survived, on tomb walls, stelae, ostraca, and papyri. Major finds include the Rind Mathematical Papyrus, the Edwin Smith Surgical Papyrus, the Tale of Two Brothers. These texts continue to shape our understanding of literature, medicine, science, and art. Modern scholars and translators like E. A. Wallace Budge and James Henry Breasted opened these worlds to us, though interpretation remains ongoing. The words that echo eternally. And now, as the last torch dims and the desert stars rise once more, let the words of ancient Egypt linger in your mind. A lullaby of gods and mortals, of laughter and loss. In every line of poetry, in every etched glyph, a voice speaks from the past. You have only to listen. Music, dance, and theatrical performance in ancient Egypt. In the world of ancient Egypt, where the sacred and the secular were often indistinguishable, music and dance thrived as essential elements of daily life, divine worship, and cultural expression. These art forms were not merely for entertainment. They served as conduits of emotion, expressions of cosmic harmony, and instruments of ritual precision. Music in ritual and worship. Music was deeply embedded in religious practice. It accompanied temple rituals, funeral processions, and state festivals. Instruments were chosen carefully based on the nature of the event and the deities being honored. The sistrum, a sacred rattle-like instrument, was particularly associated with the goddess Ether. When shaken, it was believed to dispel evil and attract divine favor. Clappers, often shaped like hands or animals, provided rhythmic percussive sounds. Harps and lyres created a melodic backdrop to hymns and chants. Flutes and reed pipes provided soft, mournful tones, suitable for funerals or meditative rituals. Priestesses, particularly those serving in the cult of Ether or Isis, often played music as part of their sacred duties. Temple musicians were respected figures, trained from a young age, and often depicted in wall carvings within the sanctuaries where they served. Secular music and social events. Beyond temples, music was a vital part of social life. Banquets, weddings, and harvest celebrations featured lively performances. Archaeological evidence, including tomb paintings and artifacts, reveals that both professional and amateur musicians existed. Ensembles played at private gatherings, often led by women. Dancers accompanied musicians, moving in synchronized steps, often with elaborate gestures and storytelling movements. Lute-like instruments and drums began appearing in the New Kingdom, adding depth and tempo. Tomb scenes from nobles' burial chambers frequently depict musicians and dancers performing at feasts, signifying joy and abundance. The role of dance. Dance in ancient Egypt ranged from solemn temple movements to exuberant festival displays. Dancers performed alone, in pairs, or in groups, often with acrobatic flourishes. Men and women danced separately in most contexts, though some exceptions existed during more liberal periods. In sacred ceremonies, the gestures of dancers were highly symbolic. Temple dance was choreographed and often performed by trained dancers or priestesses. These movements were offerings in themselves, physical prayers meant to honor deities and reenact cosmic myths. In more public settings, dancers wore bright costumes, collars, and jewelry, their bodies painted or perfumed for performance. Some were professionals, hired for events, and trained in intricate routines. Others were family members performing at celebrations. Instruments of ancient Egypt. Musical instruments were varied and crafted with care. Idiophones, e.g., clappers, sistrums produced sound by the instrument's own material. Membranophones, e.g., drums introduced in later periods, particularly from Nubia and West Asia. Chordophones, e.g., harps, lyres prominent in ceremonial music and court entertainment. Aerophones, e.g., flutes, double pipes provided rich melodies and were widely used in both sacred and secular contexts. Inscriptions occasionally reference named musicians, suggesting fame and recognition. One notable figure was Kuwit, a female singer depicted in the tomb of Antiphocra, singing hymns to Ether. Theatrical reenactments and passion plays. While Egypt did not have theaters like those in Greece or Rome, performance was not absent from their culture. Religious festivals often included dramatic reenactments of myths. The Osirian Passion Play, staged at Abydos, told the story of Osiris' murder by Set and his resurrection. Participants portrayed gods and mourners. This was arguably the world's earliest recorded form of dramatic theater. Coronation and said festivals involved symbolic displays where the king would perform his renewal of power. Mystery rituals took place in temples, often hidden from public view but involving sound, movement, and costuming. These performances were not for amusement. They were acts of magic and devotion, reinforcing divine truth through embodied storytelling. Women in music and dance. Women played a dominant role in music and dance, particularly in religious contexts. Female musicians often held titles like Chantress of Amun or Musician of Ether. Their performances invoked fertility, joy, and divine favor. Dancing girls were also depicted in more sensual roles, especially in scenes of banquets and leisure. While this duality exists, it's crucial not to impose modern moral frameworks. Artistic performance in ancient Egypt moved fluidly between sacred and celebratory realms. Influence and legacy. Egyptian music and performance influenced neighboring cultures. Instruments like the lyre and techniques like funerary lamentations spread across the ancient world. In modern Egypt, echoes of these ancient rhythms persist in folk music, traditional dances, and cultural ceremonies. Scholars and musicians have even reconstructed ancient instruments to explore how they might have sounded. Music, dance, and performance in ancient Egypt were more than artistic flourishes. They were threads that bound society to the divine, gave rhythm to daily life, and preserved collective memory. In temples and homes, in public squares and royal courts, the beat of a drum, the strum of a harp, and the swirl of a dancer's dress kept the spirit of Egypt in motion. Foreign relations and diplomatic strategies of ancient Egypt. Diplomacy on the Nile. In the ebb and flow of ancient politics, Egypt stood as both a solitary titan and an interactive partner. As powerful as its military might was, ancient Egypt also cultivated a rich tradition of diplomacy. Treaties, marriages, tributes, and envoys defined its foreign relations across millennia. In this segment, we explore how Egypt negotiated its place on the world stage, balancing war with words and swords with scrolls. The foundations of Egyptian diplomacy. Diplomatic activity in ancient Egypt can be traced as far back as the Old Kingdom. While military conquests were essential for expansion and defense, diplomacy helped the Egyptians secure long-term alliances, economic prosperity, and peace. Motivations behind diplomacy. Security. Prevent invasions or border skirmishes. Trade. Access to goods like timber, horses, copper, and incense. Political prestige. Demonstrating Egypt's supremacy through tribute and foreign alliances. Cultural exchange. Spreading Egyptian religion, language, and customs. Egypt's foreign policy strategy blended realpolitik with ritual diplomacy. Gifts, ceremonies, and symbolic acts were often as important as negotiations themselves. The Great Powers Club, Egypt and the Amarna Age. During the 14th century BCE, under pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, Egypt was part of an elite group of major powers, including Babylonia, Mitanni, Hatti, Hittite Empire, Assyria. This period saw the rise of what historians now call the Great Powers Club, in which major states communicated regularly via royal letters, trade deals, and marriage alliances. The most famous artifacts from this period are the Amarna letters. The Amarna letters, a cache of clay tablets discovered at Akhenaten, written in Akkadian, the diplomatic lingua franca of the time, include correspondence between Egyptian pharaohs and foreign kings. These letters reveal requests for gold and luxury goods, marriage negotiations involving royal daughters, squabbles over gifts and perceived slights, pleas for military aid or recognition. The tone often combined flattery with entitlement. Egypt considered itself the most blessed and powerful nation and expected appropriate deference. Marriage diplomacy, royal brides for political peace. Unlike other great powers, Egypt rarely sent its royal daughters abroad. Instead, it received foreign princesses into its court. These unions sealed alliances and elevated Egypt's status. Notable examples. Mitanni-Egyptian alliance, sealed with a Mitanni princess marrying Amenhotep III. Hittite-Egyptian marriage, after the famous Battle of Kadesh, Ramses II married a Hittite princess to conclude peace. These brides were treated as honored guests and sometimes given Egyptian names. Their presence helped maintain peace and ensured mutual cooperation. The Battle of Kadesh and the first recorded peace treaty. The Battle of Kadesh, circa 1274 BCE, between Egypt and the Hittites was one of the largest chariot battles in history. Though the battle was indecisive militarily, it laid the foundation for one of the most important diplomatic achievements in the ancient world. The Treaty of Kadesh, signed between Ramses II and Hattusili III of the Hittite Empire, written in both Egyptian and Akkadian. Clauses included mutual non-aggression, extradition of fugitives, and military aid in the event of third-party aggression, symbolized by mutual oaths before their respective gods. This treaty was a landmark in international diplomacy and is often considered the world's first known peace treaty. Trade partnerships and foreign outposts. Trade was a crucial component of Egypt's foreign policy. The Nile connected Egypt internally, but diplomatic trade routes expanded its wealth and resources. Key trade partners. Punt, known for incense, ebony, and exotic animals. Byblos, source of cedar wood and wine. Nubia Kush, gold, ivory, and slaves. Sinai and Levant, copper, turquoise, and horses. Egypt also maintained foreign garrisons and trading posts to safeguard economic interests. Ports along the Red Sea and Mediterranean served as diplomatic hubs. Tribute and vassal relations. Egypt dominated many regions as an imperial power. Rather than direct colonization, it often established vassal states, where local rulers pledged loyalty in exchange for protection and gifts. How vassalage worked. Vassals sent tribute, including goods, troops, or resources. Egyptian governors or officials monitored local rulers. Pharaohs reinforced control with regular communication and diplomatic visits. This system allowed Egypt to expand its influence without overextending its military. Diplomacy in decline, late period and foreign domination. As Egypt entered periods of instability during the Third Intermediate and Late periods, its role in international diplomacy shifted. Changes in foreign policy. Persian rule, Egypt became a satrapy. Diplomacy occurred through Persian channels. Greek period, Ptolemy's reoriented diplomacy toward Mediterranean politics. Roman conquest, Egypt lost autonomy. Foreign diplomacy became Roman policy. Despite these changes, Egyptian customs, protocol, and ceremonial diplomacy continued to influence successor states. Rituals, gifts, and symbolism in diplomacy. Diplomatic missions were rich in ceremony. Gifts were not mere bribes but sacred exchanges symbolizing respect and peace. Common diplomatic gifts. Gold and silver vessels. Exotic animals. Jewelry and textiles. Sacred relics or idols. Egyptian diplomats were often high-ranking priests or scribes who understood both etiquette and symbolism. Formal greetings, banquet protocols, and ceremonial attire played essential roles. Egypt's silent empire. Through a blend of war and wisdom, Egypt carved a unique niche in ancient international relations. Its diplomatic legacy is etched in tablets, painted on tomb walls, and echoed in the world's oldest treaties. Egypt's foreign policy was neither passive nor purely aggressive. It mastered the art of persuasion, protocol, and peace. This legacy of negotiation, relationship building, and ceremonial statecraft remains one of the civilization's most enduring and underappreciated contributions to human history. Religion, mythology, and the role of the gods in ancient Egyptian society. The divine tapestry of ancient Egypt. Welcome to the spiritual world of ancient Egypt, where gods and goddesses were not distant figures but intimately woven into every aspect of daily life. From the moment the sun rose over the Nile to the quiet moments under starry skies, divine presence was felt everywhere, in the fields, homes, temples, and even in the hearts of the pharaohs themselves. Religion was far more than a set of beliefs. It was the very foundation upon which Egyptian society stood. It influenced their art, law, governance, morality, and even their understanding of life, death, and the cosmos. In this segment, we embark on a profound journey through the myths, rituals, and divine relationships that shaped Egypt for thousands of years. The pantheon of gods, a complex and ever-evolving family. Ancient Egyptian religion was polytheistic, with hundreds of gods and goddesses, each embodying different facets of life, nature, and human experience. The pantheon was flexible, expanding and contracting over centuries with changing political and social landscapes. Major deities and their domains. Ra, the sun god and creator deity, symbolizing life, power, and renewal. Ra's journey across the sky represented the eternal cycle of life and death. Osiris, god of the afterlife, resurrection, and fertility. His myth explains death and rebirth, promising eternal life to the righteous. Isis, goddess of magic, motherhood, and healing. Wife of Osiris and mother of Horus, she was the archetype of devoted love and protection. Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship and the sky, represented the living pharaoh and divine protector of Egypt. Anubis, god of mummification and the afterlife, protector of graves, and guide of souls to the underworld. Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge. Often depicted as an ibis or baboon, he was the scribe of the gods. Set, Seth, god of chaos, storms, and deserts. Often the antagonist in myths, representing disorder and conflict. Atha, goddess of love, joy, music, and fertility. Often shown as a cow or a woman with cow horns. These gods were anthropomorphic yet could take animal forms, blending human and natural worlds in striking ways. Creation myths. Understanding the universe through story. Egyptian cosmogony varies by region, but some key myths offer profound insight into their worldview. Heliopolitan creation myth. Atum emerges from the chaotic waters of Nun, creating the first gods Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture, who then birth Jeb, earth, and Nut, sky. This divine family shapes the world. Memphite theology. Ptah creates the world through thought and speech, emphasizing the power of words and intellect. Hermopolitan Ogdoad. 8 primordial gods representing chaos and potentiality precede creation. Each myth explains natural phenomena, the origins of gods, and humanity's place in the cosmos. The balance of Marat, order, truth, harmony, versus Isfet, chaos, Fossud, is a recurring theme. The pharaoh, god-king and mediator. The pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus on earth and the son of Ra. His divine status was central to Egyptian religion and governance. He performed vital rituals ensuring Marat was upheld, built temples and monuments as offerings to the gods, was responsible for the annual flooding of the Nile, a divine event ensuring fertility and prosperity. His death was believed to transform him into Osiris, ruler of the afterlife. Pharaohs often commissioned their own mythologies, aligning themselves with gods to legitimize their reign. Temples, the houses of the gods. Temples were not just places of worship but sacred homes for gods. Priests maintained daily rituals to nourish the divine statues with food, drink, and offerings. Architecture. Temples were built with grand pylons, sanctuaries, and hypostyle halls, symbolizing the cosmic order. Rituals included chanting, music, incense burning, and processions. Priesthood, highly organized, with roles ranging from high priests to temple scribes. The temple complex was a microcosm of the universe, reflecting celestial patterns and mythic stories in its design. Festivals and rituals, celebrating the divine cycle. Religious festivals marked the calendar, blending community, worship, and entertainment. Opit Festival, a major event in Thebes celebrating the rejuvenation of the pharaoh and the gods. Wepit Renpet, New Year linked to the Nile's flood and the renewal of life. Feasts of Ether and Osiris included music, dance, and dramatic reenactments of myths. Rituals ranged from daily offerings to elaborate ceremonies that could involve thousands of participants. Death and the afterlife, journey to eternity. Belief in an afterlife was central. Egyptians invested immense effort into funerary practices, hoping to secure eternal life. Mummification, preservation of the body for the soul's return. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells to guide souls through the dangers of the underworld. Judgment of the Dead, weighing of the heart against the feather of Marat, determining one's fate. The Field of Reeds, the ideal afterlife paradise, mirroring the Nile's fertile banks. Tombs were richly decorated with religious texts, protective symbols, and offerings. Magic and the supernatural, the power of words and spells. Magic, Hika, was a fundamental force used to protect, heal, and influence the divine. Amulets, worn for protection and good fortune. Spells and incantations, written on papyri or inscribed on tombs and temples. Priests and magicians, interpreted and performed rituals to control unseen forces. Magic blurred the line between religion and daily life. Mythology in art and literature. Stories of gods and heroes were told through temple reliefs, papyrus scrolls, and oral tradition. The contendings of Horus and Seth, a complex myth about the struggle for kingship. The story of Isis and Osiris, themes of betrayal, love, and resurrection. The tale of the two brothers, explores morality and divine justice. These narratives reinforced cultural values and connected people to the divine. Legacy: Egyptian religion's enduring influence. Though the ancient Egyptian religion faded with the rise of Christianity and Islam, its influence endures. Concepts of the afterlife inspired later religious traditions. Egyptian gods were assimilated or reinterpreted in Greek and Roman pantheons. Modern spirituality and Egyptology continue to explore and revive these ancient beliefs. A civilization guided by the divine. The religion and mythology of ancient Egypt were not static relics but living, breathing forces that shaped a civilization's identity. They offered explanations for the mysteries of existence, guidelines for ethical living, and hope beyond death. Understanding Egyptian spirituality offers a window into a world where the divine was always near, and every sunrise brought the promise of renewal and harmony. Education, writing, and knowledge in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, where today we delve into the fascinating world of education, writing, and knowledge, pillars that helped build and sustain one of history's most remarkable civilizations. In ancient Egypt, knowledge was both a practical tool and a sacred gift, closely tied to the gods, particularly Thoth, the deity of wisdom, writing, and learning. The transmission of knowledge was essential for everything from maintaining complex irrigation systems, running the government, performing religious rituals, to recording history and creating literature. The origins and importance of writing. Writing in Egypt began around 3200 BCE, almost concurrently with the earliest writing systems in Mesopotamia. The Egyptians developed hieroglyphics, a system of pictorial symbols that conveyed sounds, ideas, and objects. Hieroglyphs were far more than just words. They were believed to hold magical power, capable of making the written thing come alive. This belief led to the use of writing in religious texts, royal decrees, and monumental inscriptions. Hieroglyphs and other scripts. Hieroglyphs, used mainly for monumental and sacred inscriptions. These detailed symbols could be read in multiple directions and combined logographically and phonetically. Hieratic, a cursive script derived from hieroglyphs, used primarily by priests for religious texts and administrative documents. Demotic, an even more simplified script, used for daily purposes, contracts, and letters. Coptic, developed much later, it incorporated Greek letters and became the written language of Christian Egypt. Education system. Who learned and how? Education in ancient Egypt was mostly reserved for the elite, children of scribes, priests, and officials. However, scribes formed the backbone of Egyptian bureaucracy and culture, so their training was rigorous. Scribal schools, boys began their education early, memorizing symbols and learning to write on ostraca, potsherds, or papyrus scrolls. Curriculum included reading, writing, arithmetic, literature, religious texts, and sometimes music and art. Discipline and method. Training was strict, with an emphasis on repetition and copying. Mistakes could mean punishment. Role of teachers, often harsh but highly respected. They ensured students mastered the complex scripts. The role of scribes, keepers of knowledge and power. Scribes were vital to the administration of the kingdom. They documented everything from tax records and census data to legal contracts and temple rituals. They held prestigious positions, often working directly for the pharaoh or high priests. Their literacy granted them social mobility and respect. Some scribes became influential advisors and officials. Libraries and archives, centers of learning. While the idea of libraries as we know them was not fully developed, there were archives and scriptoria attached to temples and palaces where texts were copied and stored. These centers preserved religious texts, medical treatises, literature, and historical records. Papyrus scrolls were carefully maintained by temple scribes. Mathematics and science, applied knowledge. Egyptians excelled in practical mathematics for engineering, architecture, and astronomy. Mathematics included geometry for land surveying, calculation of areas and volumes, and fractions. Medicine, advanced for its time, combining practical treatments with spiritual healing. Medical papyri show knowledge of anatomy, surgery, and pharmacology. Astronomy, used for calendar making and aligning temples with celestial bodies. Literature and wisdom texts, morality and instruction. Ancient Egyptian literature encompassed myths, poetry, instructional texts, and wisdom literature, teachings on how to live morally and wisely. The Instructions of Ptahhotep, one of the earliest known wisdom texts, offering advice on ethics and leadership. The Tale of Sinew, a famous narrative exploring themes of loyalty and exile. Love poetry, expressing emotions and relationships. Religious hymns and prayers, connecting humans to the divine. Transmission of knowledge, oral and written traditions. Knowledge was preserved both through writing and oral storytelling. Priests played a key role in maintaining religious and scientific knowledge. Stories, proverbs, and songs passed wisdom across generations. Initiations and apprenticeships ensured specialized knowledge was handed down. Challenges and innovations in preservation. Papyrus scrolls were fragile and susceptible to decay, so scribes developed techniques for storage and copying. Tombs often included spells and texts intended to protect the deceased. Temples served as knowledge hubs, ensuring continuous access to sacred and administrative texts. The legacy of Egyptian knowledge. Ancient Egypt's educational and literary traditions laid foundations for future civilizations. The art of writing, the value of knowledge, and the quest for understanding life and the cosmos resonate through millennia. Through meticulous record-keeping, mathematical prowess, and philosophical inquiry, the Egyptians built a society that valued both practical skills and spiritual wisdom, a balance that still inspires us today. Religion and spirituality in ancient Egypt, the heartbeat of a civilization. In Journey of the Profound World of Religion and Spirituality, the invisible threads that wove together Egyptian society, culture, and daily life. Religion was not just a set of beliefs in Egypt. It was the very foundation of their worldview, governance, and identity. The Egyptians saw their world as a cosmic balance maintained by the gods, and their rituals, temples, and myths served to uphold this sacred order, known as Marat. The Egyptian pantheon, gods, goddesses, and divine roles. The Egyptian gods were numerous and diverse, each embodying aspects of life, nature, and the cosmos. Ra, the sun god, creator and king of the gods, symbolizing life, light, and power. Osiris, god of the afterlife, death, and resurrection, a symbol of renewal and justice. Isis, goddess of magic, motherhood, and fertility, protector of the pharaoh. Horus, the sky god and protector of the ruler, often depicted as a falcon. Anubis, guardian of the dead and embalming god. Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge, often seen as a mediator among gods. Sekhmet, the fierce lioness goddess of war and healing. Ptah, creator god and patron of craftsmen. Countless others, each with unique roles, myths, and cults. Cosmology and the creation myths. The Egyptians believed the universe emerged from a watery chaos called Nun. Various creation myths explained the birth of the world, often centering around the rising sun god Ra or the god Atum. These myths explained natural phenomena, established divine kingship, and underscored the sacred order that Egyptians sought to maintain. The concept of Marat, order, justice, and harmony. At the heart of Egyptian spirituality was Marat, the principle of truth, balance, order, and justice. It governed the universe and human behavior. The pharaoh's role was to uphold Marat on earth. Daily life, law, and rituals revolved around maintaining this cosmic balance. Temples, houses of the gods. Temples were not just places of worship. They were centers of economic power, learning, and culture. Each temple was dedicated to a specific god or goddess. Priests performed daily rituals to sustain the god's presence. The temple complex included sanctuaries, courtyards, storehouses, and workshops. Temples acted as banks and granaries, controlling resources. Priests and priestesses, intermediaries between worlds. Priests were essential in conducting rituals, maintaining temples, and educating the public. They performed daily offerings, festivals, and funerary rites. Some priests held immense political power. Priestesses, though fewer, played vital roles, especially in music, dance, and healing rites. Rituals and festivals, community and cosmic connection. Rituals ranged from daily offerings to grand festivals. The Opit festival celebrated the link between the pharaoh and the gods. Wepit Renpet marked the new year, renewing Marat. Funerary rituals ensured safe passage to the afterlife. Public ceremonies involved music, dance, and processions that united society. Beliefs about the afterlife, death as a journey. Death was not the end but a transformation. Egyptians believed in an eternal soul, Ka, that needed preservation. Mummification preserved the body as a home for the soul. The Book of the Dead contained spells guiding the deceased through the underworld. The weighing of the heart against Marat determined one's fate in the afterlife. Magic and amulets, protection and power. Magic, Hika, was a vital force used to protect, heal, and influence events. Amulets were worn for protection. Spells were recited for health, success, and defense against evil. Magic was practiced by priests, magicians, and laypeople alike. Religion's influence on art and daily life. Religious themes permeated art, architecture, and daily practices. Tomb paintings depicted journeys to the afterlife. Statues and reliefs embodied divine attributes. Daily activities included prayers and offerings to household gods. The evolution of religion over time. Egyptian religion evolved with changing dynasties. Akhenaten's brief monotheistic revolution worshipping Aten. The blending of gods under Ptolemaic and Roman rule. The rise of new cults alongside traditional beliefs. The eternal spirit of Egyptian faith. Religion shaped every facet of ancient Egyptian life, offering meaning, structure, and hope. It was a system that connected the mortal and divine, ensured cosmic harmony, and celebrated life's mysteries. The echoes of this spirituality endure, inviting us to marvel at a civilization where the sacred was woven into the very fabric of existence. Ancient Egyptian art and architecture, stone, symbolism, and stories carved in time. In the magnificent world of ancient Egyptian art and architecture, where every chiseled stone and painted wall breathes life into stories of gods, kings, and timeless beliefs. For thousands of years, the Egyptians shaped their environment with astonishing monuments and intricate artworks, not merely to decorate, but to communicate deep spiritual truths, ensure eternal life, and project unshakable power. Today, we peel back layers of history and symbolism to understand how this civilization turned stone and pigment into a visual language that still captivates us. The purpose behind the art, more than just beauty. Unlike much of what we think of as art today, Egyptian creations were intensely purposeful. They were not just decorative. They were spiritual tools and political declarations. At its core, Egyptian art was about maintaining Marat, the cosmic order, balance, and truth. Through art, Egyptians sought to ensure harmony between the divine and earthly realms, affirm the eternal reign of the pharaoh, and secure immortality in the afterlife. Every statue, mural, and architectural marvel was designed with function in mind. To immortalize pharaohs as gods on earth, perfect and eternal. To honor and appease the gods, giving them a physical form for worship. To protect the deceased in tombs, guiding them safely through the afterlife. To record history, victories, and religious rites for future generations. This sacred mission shaped the strict artistic rules Egyptians followed, making their art instantly recognizable. Materials and mastery, the craftsman's palette. The ancient Egyptians were masters of diverse materials, from the hardness of granite to the softness of wood and pigments made from the earth's minerals. Stone, limestone was the most common, favored for its relative softness, perfect for intricate carvings. For grand statues and obelisks, granite and basalt offered durability and a shining finish after polishing. Wood and ivory, used for smaller sculptures, furniture, and ceremonial objects, these materials showed exquisite craftsmanship and detail. Pigments, using minerals like red ochre, malachite, green, azurite, blue, and orpiment, yellow, artists painted scenes with vivid colors. These colors were never chosen at random. Each had symbolic meanings tied to life, death, divinity, and the natural world. Techniques were meticulous. Artists started by sketching precise guidelines using grids on walls or stone to ensure proportions stayed consistent, especially when representing the human figure. Carvers followed these sketches, carefully removing stone to bring images to life. Painters then applied layers of color, often using binders like gum arabic to help pigments adhere. The language of symbols, understanding Egyptian iconography. Egyptian art communicated through a rich vocabulary of symbols and conventions. These were visual codes that conveyed ideas, beliefs, and status instantly to those who understood them. The Ankh, the famous key of life, symbolized eternal life and was often held by gods and pharaohs. The Eye of Horus, a protective emblem representing healing and safeguarding. The scarab beetle represented the daily rebirth of the sun and regeneration. The lotus flower, a powerful symbol of creation, purity, and rebirth, often appearing in temple reliefs and funerary art. Colors played a critical role. Red was linked to vitality and power but also chaos. Green signified fertility and growth. Gold symbolized the divine and eternal due to its untarnishing nature. Understanding these symbols is key to unlocking the stories Egyptians told through their art. Sculptures, the eternal guardians. Egyptian sculpture is renowned for its timeless quality, rigidity, and deep symbolism. Pharaohs were carved with idealized features, youthful faces, muscular physiques, and serene expressions, conveying their divine nature and eternal strength. These statues weren't meant to capture a moment in time but to represent an eternal ideal. Large statues flanked temple entrances, like colossal guardians who protected sacred spaces and reminded all who entered of the pharaoh's power. Smaller statues served religious or magical functions. Many tombs held figurines called shaptis, intended to act as servants in the afterlife, performing labor for the deceased. Reliefs and wall paintings, storytelling in stone and color. Temples and tombs were canvases where stories of gods, kings, battles, and daily life came alive in painted reliefs. These reliefs were carved with precision, then painted with vibrant colors, creating dynamic scenes filled with movement and meaning. Pharaohs were usually larger than others in scale, emphasizing their importance. Scenes could depict divine rituals, conquests, agricultural work, or mythological tales. Hieroglyphic inscriptions accompanied these images, providing explanations or prayers. The combination of image and text created a rich narrative tapestry meant to guide viewers spiritually and politically. Architectural marvels, monuments that touch the sky. Egyptian architecture is world famous for its scale and symbolic design. Pyramids, these giant tombs, like those at Giza, were designed to serve as stairways for pharaohs' souls to ascend to the heavens. Temples, complex religious structures built to honor gods and pharaohs. Temples like Karnak featured massive hypostyle halls with towering columns decorated with sacred inscriptions. Obelisks, tall, slender stone pillars topped with pyramidal shapes, symbolizing the sun's rays and often inscribed with royal achievements. Mortuary temples, built to house rituals for the dead pharaoh, ensuring their continued worship and sustenance in the afterlife. These buildings were not only feats of engineering but also cosmic symbols aligned with stars and cardinal points, reflecting Egyptian beliefs about the universe's order. Notable architectural wonders. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the last remaining wonder of the ancient world, stands as a testament to Egyptian ingenuity, built with millions of limestone blocks and aligned precisely to cardinal points. The Karnak temple complex sprawls over 200 acres, its halls echoing with prayers and adorned with hieroglyphs narrating centuries of religious life. At Abu Simbel, colossal rock temples carved into cliffs immortalize Pharaoh Ramesses II's might and divine favor, designed to impress visitors and intimidate enemies. In the Valley of the Kings, royal tombs are hidden beneath the desert sands, adorned with elaborate paintings intended to protect and guide the deceased in the journey beyond. The artisan's role, crafting the divine. Artists and craftsmen were highly skilled and trained from a young age, often within family traditions. While their individual names are mostly lost, their work survives as a testament to their mastery. Workshops, often connected to temples, produced everything from statues to intricate jewelry. The process was collaborative. Designers, carvers, painters, and jewelers worked together, ensuring every piece adhered to religious and aesthetic standards. Humility was valued. Most artists worked anonymously, viewing their craft as a service to the gods rather than personal fame. Everyday art, beauty in the mundane. Art wasn't limited to temples and tombs. Homes of the wealthy featured painted walls, decorated furniture, and finely crafted jewelry. Amulets shaped like scarabs, eyes, or ankhs were worn for protection and good fortune. Cosmetic palettes, used for applying eye makeup, were often artistically carved and painted, blending utility and beauty. Art as history, recording a civilization. Through their art, Egyptians recorded everything from epic battles to peaceful agricultural scenes, providing historians with invaluable insights. Unlike modern history, their records were symbolic, emphasizing spiritual truths and royal ideology rather than objective realism. The lasting legacy of Egyptian art and architecture. Egypt's artistic traditions deeply influenced Greek and Roman art and architecture. Many motifs, like the obelisk and the use of columns, found their way into Western architectural vocabulary. Even today, Egyptian-inspired art and design continue to captivate artists, architects, and designers worldwide. Stories carved in stone, eternal and alive. Ancient Egyptian art and architecture were not just physical creations but living stories, symbols and structures built to transcend time. Through the meticulous carving of stone and the vibrant application of color, the Egyptians created a visual language that continues to speak to us, inviting us to explore their world, beliefs, and dreams. Their art reminds us that for them, beauty and meaning were inseparable, and that every brushstroke and chisel mark was part of a sacred conversation between mortals and the divine, a conversation that echoes across millennia. Ancient Egyptian religion and mythology, worlds of gods, afterlife, and cosmic order. In the vast and sun-drenched lands along the Nile, religion was not just a belief system, it was the very foundation upon which the entire civilization stood. Every grain of sand, every ripple of the river, and every breath taken was seen as a manifestation of divine will. Ancient Egyptian religion was an all-encompassing force, touching every facet of life, from the smallest household rituals to the grand ceremonies held in towering temples. It was a world where gods and goddesses walked among mortals, where death was merely a doorway to eternal life, and where cosmic order, known as Marat, was the key to the universe's harmony. The essence of Egyptian religion, a living web of connection. Religion in ancient Egypt was deeply intertwined with the natural world and the social fabric. The Egyptians believed that the cosmos was in constant flux between order and chaos. Their gods represented forces of nature and human experience. The sun rising and setting, the flooding of the Nile, fertility, death, rebirth, love, war, and wisdom. At the center of this divine web was Marat, the principle of truth, balance, harmony, and justice. Maintaining Marat was the ultimate responsibility of the pharaoh, the living god on earth, who was seen as the guarantor of stability in the land. But this wasn't a distant concept. Common people, priests, scribes, and artisans all lived under the umbrella of Marat, striving to keep harmony in their own ways through rituals, offerings, and ethical behavior. The pantheon, the cast of divine characters. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a vast pantheon of gods, each with their unique personalities, stories, and symbolic forms. Many were depicted with animal heads, merging human and divine traits. Ra, the sun god, was the supreme deity for much of Egyptian history. He journeyed across the sky by day in his solar bark, bringing light and life to the world, and battled the forces of darkness during the night. Osiris, god of the afterlife and resurrection, was central to Egyptian beliefs about death and rebirth. His myth of betrayal, death at the hands of his brother Set, and miraculous resurrection by his wife Isis became a powerful symbol of hope and continuity. Isis, the embodiment of magic, motherhood, and protection, was revered as a caring mother and powerful sorceress. Her devotion to Osiris and their son Horus underscored themes of loyalty and divine justice. Horus, often represented as a falcon or a man with a falcon's head, symbolized kingship and protection. The pharaoh was considered Horus incarnate, the rightful ruler who would maintain Marat. Set, a god of chaos, deserts, storms, and disorder, was a complicated figure. Though often cast as the villain who murdered Osiris, Set was also a protector against foreign enemies and evil forces. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, guided souls through the afterlife and oversaw the embalming process, ensuring safe passage for the dead. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, recorded the outcome of the judgment of souls and was the inventor of language and magic. Atha, goddess of music, joy, fertility, and love, was the divine mother of the pharaoh and a patron of celebrations and dance. This divine family was not static. They evolved over time, merged in different local cults, and sometimes overlapped, reflecting the rich tapestry of Egyptian spirituality. Creation myths, the beginning of everything. Egyptian cosmology was not a single story but a collection of creation myths told in different cities, each expressing profound truths about existence. In Heliopolis, the primeval waters of Nun, the chaotic abyss, were the starting point. From this watery chaos arose Atum, the self-created god, who then gave birth to Shu, air, and Tefnut, moisture, forming the foundation of the physical world. This myth emphasized creation as a process emerging from order out of chaos. In Memphis, the god Ptah created the world through the power of thought and speech. This story highlighted the power of divine will and the sacredness of language. Other regions, like Hermopolis, told of the Ogdoad, 8 primordial deities representing elements of chaos and balance, illustrating the Egyptians' nuanced understanding of cosmic duality. Together, these myths explained not only how the world came into being but why order and balance were essential to prevent the return of chaos. Death and the afterlife, journey beyond the veil. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not a final end but a critical transformation, a journey into an eternal existence. Life on earth was a preparation for the afterlife, and the soul's safe passage depended on rituals, moral behavior, and divine favor. Central to this belief was the preservation of the body through mummification. The soul, Ka and Ba, needed a physical form to return to, so elaborate embalming ensured that the deceased could recognize their body in the next world. The soul's journey took place in the Duat, a complex underworld filled with dangers and wonders. The deceased consulted the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and instructions designed to navigate this realm safely. One of the most dramatic moments was the weighing of the heart ceremony. Here, Anubis weighed the heart against the feather of Marat. A heart heavy with sin was devoured by Amit, the fearsome goddess part lion, part hippopotamus, and part crocodile. A balanced heart meant the deceased could enter the field of reeds, a paradise reflecting the idealized life along the Nile, filled with abundance and peace. This hope of resurrection and eternal life was a powerful motivation behind Egyptian funerary customs, art, and literature. Temples, priests, and religious life. Temples were not mere buildings. They were the homes of the gods on earth and centers of religious, economic, and cultural life. Each temple housed a statue of the deity it honored, and priests performed daily rituals to care for the god and uphold cosmic order. The role of the priesthood was complex and influential. They conducted sacrifices, offered incense, recited prayers, and maintained sacred knowledge. Many priests were highly educated scribes who preserved religious texts and taught theology. Pharaohs were considered the highest priests, responsible for performing major rituals and festivals that reinforced their divine right to rule and the well-being of the land. Magic and symbolism, invisible forces at work. Magic, or Hika, was a fundamental concept, an omnipresent force given by the gods that sustained the universe. It was through magic that priests healed, protected the living, and ensured success in the afterlife. Symbols like the Ankh, life, Jed pillar, stability, was scepter, power, and the scarab beetle, rebirth, were woven into daily life and burial practices. Amulets, spells, and rituals carried magical potency to protect individuals from harm and ensure favor from the gods. Stories that shaped a culture. Mythology was the heart of Egyptian spirituality, with narratives that explained natural phenomena, justified social order, and offered hope. The story of Osiris's death and resurrection symbolized the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth, a metaphor reflected in the flooding and retreating Nile. The battle between Horus and Set represented the struggle between order and chaos, a timeless theme echoed in the human experience. These stories were more than entertainment. They were teachings on morality, justice, and the sacred nature of existence. Religion's role in society and governance. Religion was inseparable from politics. The pharaoh's divine status validated his rule, while priests served as both religious and political advisors. The state's stability depended on religious observance, and festivals were occasions for social cohesion. Common people participated through household worship, offerings, and public ceremonies, connecting them to the divine and to each other. Legacy and influence. Ancient Egyptian religion influenced later cultures profoundly. Ideas of resurrection, divine kingship, and sacred justice echoed through Greek, Roman, and even early Christian thought. Today, scholars and enthusiasts continue to study and revive ancient rituals and music, keeping the spirit of Egyptian spirituality alive. This exploration reveals how ancient Egyptians lived with a constant awareness of the divine forces shaping their world, understanding life and death as parts of a grand cosmic order. Their religion was a rich, dynamic system that offered meaning, hope, and connection, an eternal rhythm echoing through the sands of time. Ancient Egyptian art and architecture, from tombs to temples, the expression of eternity. The story of ancient Egypt is not only told in hieroglyphs and myths but also vividly expressed through its art and architecture. For a civilization so deeply focused on eternity, the physical world was a canvas to capture divine perfection and immortalize the human journey. From the soaring grandeur of temples to the intricate details of tomb paintings, Egyptian art and architecture were far more than decoration. They were sacred acts, expressions of cosmic order, and a bridge between the mortal realm and the eternal. The philosophy behind Egyptian art. At the heart of Egyptian art was the concept of ma'at, or harmony and balance. Artists did not seek mere beauty. They aimed for symbolic precision, timelessness, and spiritual resonance. Every line, proportion, and color had meaning, designed to ensure that the subject, whether a god, pharaoh, or commoner, would be perfectly preserved in the eternal world. This pursuit of eternal truth meant that Egyptian art remained remarkably consistent over thousands of years. While other cultures shifted styles and experimented with realism, Egyptian artists adhered to established conventions that reflected their worldview. The canon of proportions and style. Egyptian artists used a grid system to maintain strict proportions in human figures, ensuring uniformity and clarity. Typically, figures were depicted in a composite view, heads in profile, eyes and shoulders front-facing, torsos frontal, and legs in profile. This combination was not a limitation but a deliberate attempt to show the most characteristic and recognizable parts of the body. Colors were also symbolic. Green for rebirth, red for vitality, black for fertility of the Nile's soil, white for purity, and gold for the divine. These choices brought paintings and sculptures to life with layers of meaning beyond the surface. Sculpture, stone, wood, and eternal presence. Egyptian sculpture was monumental and symbolic. Pharaohs and gods were carved from stone to last forever, standing as eternal witnesses to divine power and human devotion. Statues of pharaohs. These often conveyed calm, strength, and divine authority. Whether seated on thrones or standing in rigid poses, these statues were designed to hold the vital essence of the person, after death. Sculptures of deities. Gods were depicted with a mix of human and animal traits, embodying their powers and realms. The lioness-headed Sekhmet conveyed fierce protection. The falcon-headed Horus signified kingship. Small figurines and amulets. These objects, often crafted from faience, ivory, or wood, were personal items believed to hold protective and magical powers. Sculptors paid close attention to detail, and while some pieces were realistic, many were idealized to reflect the eternal perfection of the divine and royal. Wall paintings and reliefs, stories in stone and pigment. Walls of tombs, temples, and palaces were transformed into vivid narratives. Painted reliefs served multiple purposes: to honor gods, record history, depict daily life, and ensure the deceased's well-being in the afterlife. Tomb paintings, scenes often showed agricultural abundance, family celebrations, and ritual activities, ensuring these blessings continued forever. They also depicted the journey into the afterlife, with protective spells and encounters with gods. Temple reliefs. These grand compositions illustrated divine mythology, royal victories, and religious ceremonies, reinforcing the pharaoh's divine mandate and the temple's sacred role. The artistry combined naturalism with idealization, vibrant colors with careful symbolism, creating a timeless visual language. Architecture, building for eternity. Egyptian architecture is one of the world's great legacies. From monumental pyramids to sprawling temple complexes, each structure was designed with cosmic significance and lasting impact. Pyramids. The Great Pyramids at Giza remain symbols of eternal power and divine kingship. These tombs were not just burial sites but gateways to the afterlife, built with precise alignment to the stars and cardinal points. The pyramid shape itself symbolized the primordial mound from which life emerged. Mastabas and tombs. Before pyramids, mastabas, flat-roofed rectangular tombs, were used to honor nobles and officials. Elaborate underground chambers and decorated chapels were designed to sustain the deceased spirit. Temples like Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel were the earthly homes of gods. Built with massive columns, open courtyards, and sanctuaries, they represented cosmic order and divine presence. The design often followed symbolic axes reflecting the sun's journey. Obelisks and statues, tall, slender obelisks carved from granite were erected to honor the sun god Ra, symbolizing a ray of sunlight anchored to earth. Egyptian builders employed advanced engineering techniques, such as precise stone cutting and transportation, that remain awe-inspiring. Materials and techniques. The Egyptians worked with a variety of materials. Stone, limestone, sandstone, and granite were common in temples and tombs. Wood, used for furniture, small statues, and coffins. Faience and glass, glazed materials made colorful beads and amulets. Pigments, derived from minerals like malachite, green, ochre, red, yellow, and charcoal, black. Techniques included carving, painting, inlay, and gilding, each chosen to ensure longevity and beauty. Artisans and their workshops. Artists and craftsmen were organized in workshops often attached to temples or royal estates. These skilled workers passed their knowledge through generations, maintaining the standards and styles. Training was rigorous, with apprentices learning drawing, carving, painting, and the symbolic meanings behind every detail. Art and architecture as political and religious tools. Beyond their aesthetic value, art and architecture reinforced the pharaoh's divine authority and religious ideals. Large-scale projects created jobs and unified the population around common goals. Monuments and temples served as centers for worship, administration, and education, integrating religion and governance. Legacy, timeless beauty and influence. Ancient Egyptian art and architecture have influenced countless cultures, from the Greeks and Romans who borrowed motifs, to modern architects inspired by the monumental scale and symbolism. The discovery of tombs like Tutankhamun's sparked a global fascination that continues today. The eternal voice of stone and color. Egyptian art and architecture are more than relics of the past. They are expressions of a civilization's soul, a testament to their quest for immortality and divine connection. Each temple column, painted wall, and carved statue speaks across millennia, inviting us to understand a people who saw eternity not as a distant dream, but as a living, breathing reality etched in stone and color. Religion and spiritual beliefs in ancient Egypt, the foundation of a civilization. Religion in ancient Egypt was the very heart of its culture and identity. It permeated every aspect of life, from the rise of the Nile to the construction of towering monuments, from the rituals performed in grand temples to the quiet prayers whispered in family homes. The ancient Egyptians lived in a universe where gods and goddesses governed nature, society, and the afterlife, shaping their worldview and daily existence. Understanding their religion means unlocking the keys to their society's endurance, artistry, and mystique. The Egyptian cosmos, order from chaos. At the dawn of time, according to Egyptian belief, there was only none, a boundless, chaotic watery abyss. From this primordial ocean arose the first land, the Ben Mound, symbolizing creation and rebirth. This emergence set the stage for Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order, truth, and justice. Marat was the foundation upon which the gods maintained balance in the universe, and human beings were expected to uphold it in their lives. Opposing Marat was Isfet, the force of chaos and disorder. The eternal struggle between these forces shaped mythologies, rituals, and even political ideologies. The pantheon, gods and goddesses of Egypt. The Egyptian pantheon was vast and complex, with hundreds of deities personifying natural elements, concepts, and social functions. Many gods had multiple aspects or merged identities as beliefs evolved over time. Some of the most important deities included Ra, the sun god and supreme creator, often depicted as a falcon-headed man crowned with a solar disk. Ra's daily journey across the sky symbolized life, death, and rebirth. Osiris, god of the afterlife, resurrection, and fertility. Osiris's story of death and rebirth became the cornerstone of Egyptian funerary beliefs. Isis, wife of Osiris and mother of Horus. Isis was revered as a goddess of magic, motherhood, and healing. Horus, the falcon-headed god representing kingship and protection. Pharaohs were considered living Horus on earth. Anubis, jackal-headed god of embalming and protector of the dead. Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge, often depicted as an ibis-headed scribe. Atha, goddess of love, music, and joy, closely associated with fertility and motherhood. Sekhmet, fierce lioness goddess of war and healing. Each deity had temples, festivals, and a unique role within the divine order, reflecting the multifaceted nature of Egyptian spirituality. The pharaoh, divine king and mediator. The pharaoh was not just a political ruler but also a divine figure, believed to be the living embodiment of Horus and the son of Ra. His role was to uphold Marat, maintain harmony, and ensure prosperity through religious duties and military might. The pharaoh acted as an intermediary between gods and people, performing rituals that kept the cosmos balanced. His temples served as homes for gods on earth, and monumental tombs were built to secure his transition to the afterlife. Temples, houses of the gods. Temples were the spiritual and political centers of ancient Egypt. Unlike churches or synagogues, temples were primarily the gods' residences rather than places for communal worship. Only priests and the pharaoh could enter the inner sanctums where the god's statue resided. Everyday Egyptians participated through festivals and offerings but rarely entered these sacred spaces. Key features of temples included pylons, massive gateways symbolizing the horizon and the boundary between the earthly and divine. Courtyards and hypostyle halls, open spaces for gatherings and monumental halls filled with towering columns decorated with carvings and hieroglyphs. Sanctuaries, inner chambers housing the cult statues. Temples were centers of economic activity, education, and medicine, sustaining priests, artisans, and workers. Priests and religious officials. Priests were the custodians of divine knowledge and ritual. They conducted daily ceremonies, maintained the temples, and performed magic to protect and bless the land. Priesthood was organized in hierarchical ranks, with high priests overseeing complex rituals and lesser priests handling routine duties. Women could also serve as priestesses, particularly in cults of goddesses like Ether. The religious calendar was filled with festivals and observances, each requiring specific rites to honor gods and ensure cosmic balance. Beliefs about the afterlife. Perhaps no aspect of Egyptian religion is more famous than its intricate beliefs about death and the afterlife. The Egyptians viewed death as a transition, not an end, and their elaborate burial practices reflect a deep concern with the soul's journey. The soul was composed of several parts. Ka, the life force that needed sustenance. Ba, the personality or spirit that could move between worlds. Ak, the transformed, eternal self. The deceased required proper burial, mummification, and funerary goods to survive the trials of the afterlife. The Book of the Dead contained spells to protect and guide the soul. Judgment before Osiris in the Hall of Truth determined if the soul could enter paradise. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Marat was the ultimate test of purity and justice. Magic and ritual, the power of words and actions. Magic, or Hika, was integral to Egyptian religion. It was seen as a natural force granted by the gods that could influence the world through words, symbols, and rituals. Priests and magicians used spells to heal, protect, curse enemies, and secure favor from gods. Amulets, incantations, and ritual objects were common, believed to hold real power. Magic was also a daily practice in homes, helping people cope with illness, danger, and uncertainty. Festivals and religious celebrations. The religious calendar was rich with festivals, many linked to agricultural cycles, celestial events, or mythology. Opit Festival celebrated the rejuvenation of the pharaoh's divine power, featuring grand processions from Karnak to Luxor. Wepit Renpet, the New Year festival, marking renewal and fertility. Feast of Atha, music, dance, and celebration honoring the goddess of joy. Festivals united communities, blending religious devotion with social bonding. Influence and adaptation over time. Egyptian religion evolved over millennia, absorbing foreign influences and adapting to changing political landscapes. During the New Kingdom, Atenism briefly introduced monotheism under Akhenaten, worshipping the sun disk Aten exclusively. Though short-lived, it challenged traditional beliefs. Later periods saw syncretism, combining Egyptian gods with Greek, Roman, and Nubian deities, enriching the spiritual tapestry. Legacy of ancient Egyptian religion. The impact of Egyptian religious ideas extends far beyond its own time. Concepts of the afterlife, divine kingship, and sacred magic influenced neighboring cultures and continue to inspire modern spirituality and popular imagination. Their monumental temples and tombs remain powerful symbols of humanity's quest to understand the divine and eternal. Egyptian religion was not merely a set of beliefs but a way of life that shaped how the ancient people understood themselves, the cosmos, and their place in time and eternity. It was a world where gods walked among men, where death was a passage to a new beginning, and where harmony reigned as the ultimate ideal. Ancient Egyptian art and architecture, expressions of faith and power. Ancient Egyptian civilization left a legacy of breathtaking art and architecture that continues to captivate and inspire. These creations were far more than decorative. They were visual expressions of religious beliefs, political authority, and the eternal aspirations of a people who sought to bridge the mortal and divine. From the soaring pyramids that still dominate the desert skyline to the intricate wall paintings in tombs, every piece was crafted with profound symbolism and meticulous purpose. To understand Egypt's art and architecture is to glimpse the soul of its civilization. The philosophy behind Egyptian art. Egyptian art was governed by strict conventions aimed at maintaining ma'at, cosmic order, and ensuring harmony. This meant that form and function were inseparable. Figures were depicted in a composite view, heads and legs in profile, torsos front-facing. This stylization was not about realism but about showing each part of the body from its most recognizable angle, symbolizing completeness and clarity. Scale was used to indicate importance. Pharaohs appeared larger than commoners or servants. Colors were symbolic. Red symbolized power and vitality, green life and fertility, black rebirth, and white purity. Art was created for eternity, to preserve the essence of a person or god and to serve religious purposes. Materials and techniques. Egyptian artists worked with a variety of materials. Stone, limestone, sandstone, granite, and basalt were quarried for statues, temples, and monuments. Wood, used in smaller statues, furniture, and coffins. Pigments, derived from minerals such as ochre, malachite, and lapis lazuli. Gold and faience, for jewelry and decorative inlays. Techniques included carving, painting, relief sculpture, both raised and sunken, and inlays. Monumental architecture, temples and tombs. The pyramids. The pyramids are the most iconic symbols of ancient Egypt. Tombs designed to honor and protect pharaohs in their journey to the afterlife. The Step Pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara was the first monumental stone structure, designed by Imhotep, heralding the age of pyramid building. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Khufu, remains an architectural marvel. Its precise geometry and immense scale reflect the pharaoh's divine status and mastery over the cosmos. Pyramids were surrounded by mortuary temples, causeways, and smaller tombs for queens and nobles. Mortuary temples. Temples dedicated to the worship of the deceased pharaohs, such as the Temple of Hatshepsut, combined religious function with grandeur, featuring colonnaded terraces and detailed reliefs depicting divine birth and kingship. Funerary tombs. The Valley of the Kings contains rock-cut tombs richly decorated with paintings and inscriptions intended to guide and protect the dead. These tombs reveal a wealth of mythology and beliefs about the afterlife. Temples for the gods. Great temples such as Karnak and Luxor served as houses for gods on earth, where priests performed rituals daily. These temples featured massive pylons, hypostyle halls with towering columns, sacred lakes, and obelisks, all aligned with celestial bodies. Sculpture, immortalizing gods and kings. Sculpture was a vital medium for religious and political expression. Statues of pharaohs, these often depicted the ruler as eternal, serene, and idealized, embodying strength and divine power. Colossal statues, like the statues of Ramses II at Abu Simbel, intended to or subjects and enemies alike. Statuettes of deities, carved for temples or personal worship, often imbued with magical power. Sculptors adhered to canonical proportions, balancing realism and symbolism. Wall paintings and reliefs. Tombs and temples were adorned with vibrant murals and bas-reliefs that told stories, recorded history, and illustrated religious texts. Scenes depicted everyday life, royal achievements, mythological tales, and the journey of the soul through the afterlife. Artists used hieroglyphic inscriptions alongside images, blending visual art with language. The colors and scenes were carefully chosen for their protective and beneficial powers. Jewelry and decorative arts. Ancient Egyptians were masters of personal adornment. Jewelry was both beautiful and symbolic, believed to offer protection and convey status. Materials ranged from gold and precious stones to faience beads and shells. Common motifs included the ankh, symbol of life, the scarab beetle, rebirth, and the Eye of Horus, protection. Jewelry was worn by men, women, and children, reflecting wealth and devotion. Everyday objects, functional and artistic. Art was not confined to temples and tombs. Pottery, furniture, and tools were often decorated, revealing the aesthetic sensibility of everyday Egyptians. These items also carried symbolic meanings and were crafted to last in both life and death. Symbolism in Egyptian art and architecture. Symbolism was central. Nothing was merely decorative. The lotus flower symbolized creation and rebirth. The scarab beetle represented transformation. The Eye of Horus was a powerful amulet of protection and healing. The Sphinx combined human intellect with animal strength, guarding sacred spaces. Architecture aligned with celestial events. Temples often faced the rising sun. Obelisks marked solar paths, reflecting the connection between heaven and earth. Artisans and patronage. Artists and craftsmen worked under the patronage of pharaohs and priests, often in workshops linked to temples or royal courts. Training was rigorous, following established canons passed through generations. Despite strict conventions, artists found ways to express subtle variations and innovations over time. The enduring legacy of Egyptian art and architecture. Egyptian art and architecture influenced civilizations across the Mediterranean and Near East. Their emphasis on monumentality, symbolism, and religious integration inspired Greek and Roman art, and continues to inspire modern architecture and design. Today, these ancient works remain a testament to human creativity, faith, and the desire for immortality. Ancient Egyptian art and architecture are more than remnants of a distant past. They are living narratives carved in stone and painted on walls, telling stories of gods, kings, and ordinary people. They reveal a civilization deeply committed to expressing its values, beliefs, and aspirations through timeless beauty and grandeur. Ancient Egyptian religion and mythology, the cosmic drama of gods and mortals. Egyptian religion was the very heart of ancient Egyptian culture. It was not a simple system of beliefs but an intricate cosmic drama, unfolding over millennia, weaving gods, humans, nature, and the afterlife into one seamless tapestry. The Egyptians understood their world through stories, myths that explained creation, order, chaos, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. At the center of this vast pantheon were gods and goddesses who embodied forces of nature and human qualities. Their stories were not just tales. They were living truths that shaped how Egyptians lived, worshipped, and understood existence. The creation myths. How it all began. Egyptian creation myths vary by region, but the common thread is the emergence of order from primordial chaos. In Heliopolitan tradition, the world began with Nun, the chaotic watery abyss. From Nun arose the sun god Atum, who created himself and then birthed other gods through acts of creation that symbolized the formation of land, sky, and life. Other myths speak of Ptah, the craftsman god of Memphis, who created the world through speech and thought, a powerful idea that words and knowledge shape reality. These stories emphasize that creation was a deliberate act of bringing order, Ma'at, from chaos, Isfet. The major gods and goddesses. The Egyptian pantheon is vast, but a few key figures dominate the mythological landscape. Ra, the sun god, symbol of creation and life, who sailed the sky in his solar bark each day, battling the serpent Apophis to ensure the sun's rising. Osiris, god of the afterlife, death, and resurrection, a symbol of eternal life and rebirth. Isis, wife of Osiris, goddess of magic, motherhood, and protection. Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship and the sky, son of Isis and Osiris, who avenged his father and restored order. Set, Seth god of chaos, deserts, storms, and violence, the eternal antagonist. Anubis, jackal-headed god of mummification and protector of the dead. Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge. Atha, goddess of music, joy, and love. Each god had multiple roles and forms, reflecting the Egyptians' complex understanding of the divine. The myth of Osiris, death and resurrection. One of the most enduring stories is the myth of Osiris. According to legend, Osiris was a just and benevolent king who was murdered by his jealous brother Set. Set dismembered Osiris and scattered his parts across Egypt. Isis, using her magical powers, gathered his body and resurrected him long enough to conceive their son Horus. Osiris then became lord of the underworld, symbolizing death and eternal life. Horus grew to avenge his father, battling Set to reclaim the throne, representing the triumph of order over chaos. This myth was central to Egyptian views of kingship, the afterlife, and moral order. Temples and religious practices. Temples were the homes of the gods on earth. Priests performed rituals daily to maintain the gods' favor and cosmic balance. These rituals included offerings, prayers, purification, and festivals. The pharaoh acted as the intermediary between gods and people, responsible for upholding Ma'at. Popular festivals such as Wepetrenpet, New Year, and the Opet festival celebrated renewal, fertility, and divine kingship. The afterlife, journey beyond death. Egyptians believed in a complex afterlife journey, where the soul faced judgment and hoped for eternal life in the field of reeds, an idealized version of Egypt. The Book of the Dead provided spells and guidance for navigating the dangers of the underworld. The weighing of the heart ceremony judged the deceased soul against the feather of Ma'at. A pure heart allowed passage, a heavy heart meant destruction. Mummification preserved the body so the soul could return, emphasizing the connection between physical and spiritual existence. Magic and ritual. Magic, Heka, was an everyday force. Egyptians believed it could influence gods, protect from harm, and heal illness. Priests and magicians wielded magic through spells, amulets, and rituals. Magic was intertwined with religion, science, and medicine, demonstrating the Egyptians' holistic worldview. The influence of myth on daily life. Myths shaped festivals, art, and personal devotion. Household shrines held statues and amulets representing protective deities. Stories were told and retold to teach values of loyalty, justice, and courage. A living spiritual world. Ancient Egyptian religion was a dynamic, living force that connected people with the cosmos. It offered meaning to life, death, and the mysteries beyond. The gods were not distant but intimately involved in every aspect of existence, guiding, protecting, and challenging humanity. This rich spiritual tradition remains one of history's most profound legacies. Food, diet, and culinary practices in ancient Egypt. Food was not merely sustenance for ancient Egyptians. It was a sacred act tied to cosmology, social status, religious observance, and community identity. With the Nile as their life source, Egyptians cultivated an array of crops, raised livestock, and developed complex culinary customs that reflect the ingenuity and adaptability of their civilization. Agricultural foundations of the Egyptian diet. The Nile's predictable flooding nourished the land and made agriculture abundant. Fields yielded crops in 3 distinct seasons. Akhet, inundation. The Nile flooded, depositing silt. Peret, emergence. Crops were planted. Shimu, harvest. Time to collect the yield. Primary staples included emmer wheat and barley, used for bread and beer. Lentils, fava beans, and peas for protein. Lax, not for eating, but crucial for linen and oil pressing. Fruits like dates, figs, grapes, and dom palm fruit were common, while vegetables included lettuce, onions, garlic, radishes, and cucumbers. Bread, the staff of life. Bread was the cornerstone of every meal. Made from emmer wheat, it varied in texture and shape, sometimes round, other times shaped like cones or animals. Grinding grain with stone querns often left sand in the dough, which led to dental wear. Bakers kneaded dough with feet in large vats, occasionally flavoring it with honey, fruits, or herbs. Some tomb paintings show over 40 types of bread, revealing culinary creativity. Beer, the national beverage. Beer was more than a drink. It was essential nutrition. Brewed from fermented barley loaves soaked in water and strained, beer had a thick, porridge-like consistency. Labourists received beer as part of their rations. Religious offerings included beer to honor gods and spirits. Variations existed in strength and flavor depending on the consumer's class. Meat, fish, and protein sources. While the elite had regular access to meat, the poor consumed it less frequently. Common meats included beef, goat, mutton, and game birds like duck or goose. Poultry raised in rural households. Fish from the Nile, tilapia, catfish, and perch were smoked, dried, or salted. In some temples, priests avoided fish, associating it with taboo myths. Dairy and eggs. Evidence suggests dairy was consumed in moderation. Cow's milk, goat's milk, and their products like cheese and butter appear in some tombs and offering lists. Chicken eggs were available by the late period, but likely rare and luxury items in earlier dynasties. Spices, oils, and flavorings. The Egyptian palate was seasoned with coriander, cumin, fennel, and mustard seeds. Honey, the primary sweetener. Salt, both mined and evaporated from salt lakes. Olive oil was expensive and likely imported, while sesame and flaxseed oils were pressed locally. Feasting and ritual meals. Banquets featured roasted meats, fresh fruit, beer, wine, and sweet pastries. Guests were served by perfumed servants, and musicians and dancers entertained. Ritual offerings to the gods mirrored these meals, symbolizing abundance and reciprocity. Temples often had kitchens to prepare sacred food. Dining customs and tableware. Meals were eaten seated on mats. Tables were low, made of wood or clay. Pottery vessels held stews and porridge. Bronze and ceramic bowls served individual portions. Eating was communal and informal. Hands were used, and servants assisted the elite. Class distinctions in diet. Nobility, fine breads, imported wine, meat, desserts. Artisans, hearty stews, vegetables, fish, beer. Peasants, simple bread, onions, lentils, beer. Despite disparities, most Egyptians had reliable access to basic foods, due in part to the state granaries and surplus storage. Culinary tools and kitchens. Kitchens were outdoor or semi-enclosed spaces near homes or temples. Equipment included clay ovens for baking, grain mills and grinders, storage jars, amphorae, bronze knives, wooden spoons, ceramic bowls. Cookbooks haven't survived, but recipes are implied through tomb imagery and ingredient lists on ostraca. Food and the afterlife. Food was so essential that tombs were stocked with images and models of meals to nourish the Ka, spirit. Funerary texts list eternal menus for the deceased. Offering tables held symbolic meals of bread, beer, onions, and meat. Models of bakers, brewers, and butchers ensured perpetual sustenance. Food in ancient Egypt was far more than physical nourishment. It was a ritual, a symbol of social order, and a pathway to eternal life. Through careful cultivation, seasonal rhythms, and spiritual significance, ancient Egyptians cultivated a culinary culture that not only sustained a civilization but flavored its soul. Education and knowledge systems in ancient Egypt. Education in ancient Egypt was a privilege, a structured endeavor primarily reserved for the elite, scribes, and those destined for specialized professions within temples, the royal court, or administration. Yet, even within its social confines, Egyptian education was remarkably advanced for its time, encompassing subjects ranging from language and mathematics to medicine, theology, and astronomy. Who went to school? Formal education was not universal. Peasant children typically learned trades through observation and practice at home or in the fields. In contrast, children of officials, priests, and scribes entered institutional education, typically starting around age 5. These schools were often attached to temples or government buildings and were sometimes called houses of instruction or the place of teaching. The curriculum. At the core of Egyptian education was literacy, specifically the ability to read and write hieroglyphs and hieratic, the cursive form of hieroglyphs. Students began with the basics, copying signs, learning phonetics, and memorizing standard texts such as the Instructions of Ptahhotep, a guide to proper conduct and wisdom. Arithmetic and geometry were essential for administration, agriculture, and construction. Students learned calculations involving grain measurements, land area, and labor accounting. Religious instruction was crucial, particularly for those entering temple service. Students studied hymns, ritual protocols, and sacred texts. Memorization and repetition were common learning tools. Teachers and discipline. Teachers were strict and discipline was rigid. Corporal punishment was a normal part of the educational process, believed to instill diligence and humility. Students were expected to respect their instructors as fatherly figures. Scribal schools. The most prestigious educational path was that of the scribe. Scribes were the intellectual elite, record keepers, accountants, and bureaucrats vital to every level of governance. Training to become a scribe could take many years and included practice on ostraca, pottery shards, or wooden boards before progressing to expensive papyrus. Scribes often trained in copying literary and instructional texts, which helped preserve Egyptian culture across centuries. Women and education. While most formal education was male-dominated, evidence suggests that some women, especially those in noble or priestly families, were literate. Female healers, priestesses, and scribes are documented, although they were rare. Higher learning and specialized knowledge. Advanced education existed for select professionals. Doctors underwent training in temple-sanctioned houses of life, where medical papyri were studied. Architects and engineers likely trained under master practitioners within royal workshops or major building projects. Priests received theological, astronomical, and calendrical education. They memorized rituals and observed celestial movements, essential for aligning temples and performing rites. Libraries and knowledge storage. Knowledge was meticulously recorded on papyrus scrolls and housed in temple libraries, the most famous being the Library of the Temple of Edfu and later the Great Library of Alexandria, though the latter was post-Pharaonic. These archives contained medical treatises, hymns, administrative records, and mythological texts. Legacy of Egyptian education. The Egyptian model of education, centered on memorization, reverence for texts, and institutional learning, influenced neighboring cultures, including the Greeks. It fostered a scribal class that preserved Egypt's culture, religion, and administration for over 3,000 years. In sum, education in ancient Egypt was a structured, elite endeavor, tightly interwoven with religion and statecraft. It enabled the creation of one of history's most enduring civilizations. Crime, justice, and law enforcement in ancient Egypt. Imagine the echo of sandals on stone, a tense silence in the shadow of a sandstone temple. A dispute brews between neighbors. A stolen goat. A broken promise. And now, justice must be sought. In the complex society of ancient Egypt, maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth, balance, and justice, was paramount. Law was not a cold bureaucratic system. It was spiritual, moral, and divine. It touched every citizen from the highest noble to the humblest farmer. In this segment, we explore how ancient Egypt handled crime, enforced justice, and structured its legal system across dynasties. The foundations of Egyptian justice. Ma'at as legal philosophy. At the heart of ancient Egyptian law was Ma'at, the embodiment of truth, order, balance, and harmony. This concept wasn't merely philosophical, it guided every aspect of governance, morality, and legality. Ma'at as divine order. Egyptians believed the world was created in perfect balance. Any crime, be it theft or murder, was a disruption of that balance. Ma'at personified, often depicted as a goddess with an ostrich feather. She stood beside the gods in the afterlife and beside judges in the courtrooms of life. Law as cosmic responsibility. Maintaining Ma'at was not just the job of kings and judges, it was the duty of every citizen. Even pharaohs were bound to uphold Ma'at. Their legitimacy depended not on force, but on their ability to preserve order and stability. The pharaoh, supreme judge and lawgiver. The pharaoh, as the living god and high priest of every temple, was Egypt's ultimate authority, not just in politics, but in legal affairs. Pharaohs issued decrees, resolved disputes, and appointed judges. They were viewed as the earthly agent of the gods, particularly Ra and Osiris, tasked with maintaining justice. However, the pharaoh didn't personally oversee every trial. He delegated judicial responsibilities to officials, viziers, governors, and local magistrates. Legal officials and the judiciary system. The vizier, Chief Justice of Egypt. The vizier was second only to the pharaoh and supervised the entire legal system. He oversaw the courts, appointed judges, received petitions, and enforced royal decrees. Judges and local magistrates. Local officials acted as judges in towns and villages. Judges were educated, often scribes or priests, trained in law and ethics. Many courts operated from temple precincts, reinforcing the divine basis of justice. The Medjay, police force and military police. Originating as Nubian mercenaries, the Medjay evolved into a policing class. They patrolled cities, guarded tombs, investigated crimes, and enforced sentences. In urban areas, they ensured market fairness, arrested thieves, and deterred unrest. Court structure and legal proceedings. Courtrooms were public spaces, often open air or temple courtyards. They functioned with a structured process. The legal process. Petition filed. The plaintiff submitted a complaint to the court. Summons issued. Both parties were summoned to appear. Evidence presented. Eyewitnesses, written contracts, or oaths were used. Verdict rendered. Judges debated, referred to legal precedents, and ruled. Punishment administered. Execution, exile, beatings, or restitution, depending on the crime. Evidence and witnesses. Egypt lacked forensic science but emphasized testimony and physical contracts. Swearing an oath before a god or in a temple made false testimony spiritually dangerous. In some cases, divine intervention was sought. Rituals were used to reveal guilt. Common crimes and legal offenses. Ancient Egypt faced familiar issues, thievery, corruption, and violence, as well as unique cases tied to religion and status. Theft and property crimes. One of the most common crimes. Punishments. Fines, restitution, beatings, or hard labor. Tomb robbery. Considered a heinous crime, both for its material theft and spiritual violation. Robbers were seen as disturbing the dead, angering gods, and risking eternal damnation. Corruption and abuse of power. Judges, scribes, and officials who accepted bribes were severely punished. Pharaohs like Horem issued harsh decrees against corruption. Adultery and moral crimes. Adultery was socially damaging. Wives of nobles accused of infidelity could be mutilated or divorced. Lesser moral offenses might incur community shame or exile. Religious offenses. Blasphemy, damaging sacred objects, or impersonating a priest was met with strict penalties. Punishment and penalty. Justice or brutality. Types of punishment. Beatings, common for thieves and minor offenders. Fines, often used in cases involving property disputes. Exile, used for disgraced officials or serious crimes without execution. Forced labor, offenders sent to work in mines, quarries, or state projects. Execution, reserved for high crimes, treason, murder, or sacrilege. Ritualized punishment. Some penalties were public and symbolic, intended to restore balance, marat, not just punish. For example, tomb robbers might be buried alive or burned, symbolically severing them from the afterlife. The role of religion in legal affairs. The legal system was infused with religious belief. Temples as courthouses. Many trials occurred in sacred spaces. Priests as legal experts. Temple scribes knew ritual law, contracts, and theological precedents. Divine oracles. In difficult cases, oracles of gods like Amun were consulted for judgment. In the New Kingdom, priests might carry sacred statues that nodded to indicate guilt or innocence, interpreted as divine decisions. Legal rights and limitations. Despite class divisions, ancient Egypt offered certain legal protections. Women's rights. Women could own property, initiate divorce, and appear in court. Contracts, written agreements, marriage, labor, or trade were legally binding. Appeals. Some records show cases being escalated to higher courts or even the vizier. However, justice was not always equal. Wealth and influence often swayed outcomes. Famous cases from history. The Judicial Papyrus of Turin records trials of 20 men and women for tomb robbery during Ramses IX's reign. Punishments ranged from execution to mutilation. Highlights how even high-ranking officials were implicated in criminal rings. Harem conspiracy of Ramses III. One of the most famous ancient Egyptian trials. Queen Tai and conspirators plotted to kill the king. Resulted in public trials, executions, and suicides among nobles. Evolution of law under foreign rule. Hyksos and Libyans. Introduced new administrative structures but preserved Egyptian law. Persians. Codified certain taxes and penalties. Legalism became more standardized and imperial. Greeks. Ptolemaic rule. Greek and Egyptian legal systems coexisted. Citizens could choose between native courts and Greek tribunals. Romans. Introduced Roman law, which slowly eclipsed Egyptian practices. Temple justice faded, replaced by imperial bureaucracy. Legal legacy of ancient Egypt. The Egyptian model of law as moral order influenced later traditions. Concepts of justice tied to divinity seen in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Written contracts and civil codes inspired Greco-Roman systems. Hierarchical courts and appeal processes laid groundwork for future legal bureaucracy. Justice in ancient Egypt was more than a function of state. It was a sacred trust. In dusty courtrooms of stone and beneath the eye of the gods, order was maintained not by sword alone, but by pen, oath, and principle. Every crime, every law, every verdict was part of a much larger truth, that the universe must remain in balance. The voice of Marat still echoes through the ages, reminding us that justice, to endure, must be more than law. It must be sacred. Religion, priesthood, and the gods, the spiritual backbone of ancient Egypt. The foundations of Egyptian justice, Marat as legal philosophy. At the heart of ancient Egyptian law was Marat, the embodiment of truth, order, balance, and harmony. This concept wasn't merely philosophical, it guided every aspect of governance, morality, and legality. Marat as divine order. Egyptians believed the world was created in perfect balance. Any crime, be it theft or murder, was a disruption of that balance. Marat personified, often depicted as a goddess with an ostrich feather. She stood beside the gods in the afterlife and beside judges in the courtrooms of life. Law as cosmic responsibility. Maintaining Marat was not just the job of kings and judges, it was the duty of every citizen. Even pharaohs were bound to uphold Marat. Their legitimacy depended not on force, but on their ability to preserve order and stability. The pharaoh, supreme judge and lawgiver. The pharaoh, as the living god and high priest of every temple, was Egypt's ultimate authority, not just in politics, but in legal affairs. Pharaohs issued decrees, resolved disputes, and appointed judges. They were viewed as the earthly agent of the gods, particularly Ra and Osiris, tasked with maintaining justice. However, the pharaoh didn't personally oversee every trial. He delegated judicial responsibilities to officials, viziers, governors, and local magistrates. Legal officials and the judiciary system. The vizier, Chief Justice of Egypt. The vizier was second only to the pharaoh and supervised the entire legal system. He oversaw the courts, appointed judges, received petitions, and enforced royal decrees. Judges and local magistrates. Local officials acted as judges in towns and villages. Judges were educated, often scribes or priests, trained in law and ethics. Many courts operated from temple precincts, reinforcing the divine basis of justice. The Medjay, police force and military police. Originating as Nubian mercenaries, the Medjay evolved into a policing class. They patrolled cities, guarded tombs, investigated crimes, and enforced sentences. In urban areas, they ensured market fairness, arrested thieves, and deterred unrest. Court structure and legal proceedings. Courtrooms were public spaces, often open air or temple courtyards. They functioned with a structured process. The legal process. Petition filed. The plaintiff submitted a complaint to the court. Summons issued. Both parties were summoned to appear. Evidence presented. Eyewitnesses, written contracts, or oaths were used. Verdict rendered. Judges debated, referred to legal precedents, and ruled. Punishment administered. Execution, exile, beatings, or restitution, depending on the crime. Evidence and witnesses. Egypt lacked forensic science but emphasized testimony and physical contracts. Swearing an oath before a god or in a temple made false testimony spiritually dangerous. In some cases, divine intervention was sought. Rituals were used to reveal guilt. Common crimes and legal offenses. Ancient Egypt faced familiar issues, thievery, corruption, and violence, as well as unique cases tied to religion and status. Theft and property crimes. One of the most common crimes. Punishments. Fines, restitution, beatings, or hard labor. Tomb robbery. Considered a heinous crime, both for its material theft and spiritual violation. Robbers were seen as disturbing the dead, angering gods, and risking eternal damnation. Corruption and abuse of power. Judges, scribes, and officials who accepted bribes were severely punished. Pharaohs like Horem issued harsh decrees against corruption. Adultery and moral crimes. Adultery was socially damaging. Wives of nobles accused of infidelity could be mutilated or divorced. Lesser moral offenses might incur community shame or exile. Religious offenses. Blasphemy, damaging sacred objects, or impersonating a priest was met with strict penalties. Punishment and penalty. Justice or brutality. Types of punishment. Beatings, common for thieves and minor offenders. Fines, often used in cases involving property disputes. Exile, used for disgraced officials or serious crimes without execution. Forced labor, offenders sent to work in mines, quarries, or state projects. Execution, reserved for high crimes, treason, murder, or sacrilege. Ritualized punishment. Some penalties were public and symbolic, intended to restore balance, marat, not just punish. For example, tomb robbers might be buried alive or burned, symbolically severing them from the afterlife. The role of religion in legal affairs. The legal system was infused with religious belief. Temples as courthouses. Many trials occurred in sacred spaces. Priests as legal experts. Temple scribes knew ritual law, contracts, and theological precedents. Divine oracles. In difficult cases, oracles of gods like Amun were consulted for judgment. In the New Kingdom, Priests might carry sacred statues that nodded to indicate guilt or innocence, interpreted as divine decisions. Legal rights and limitations. Despite class divisions, ancient Egypt offered certain legal protections. Women's rights. Women could own property, initiate divorce, and appear in court. Contracts, written agreements, marriage, labor, or trade were legally binding.